Christian nationalism. And in America, there's a growth of what's sometimes actually called white Christian nationalism. And I'll come to why I think they call it that in a minute. But white Christian nationalists tend to come from evangelical churches, which is a certain brand of church. We don't necessarily mean the true meaning of evangelical. It's sort of like a party within the church. Evangelical simply means people who believe in the gospel.
Yeah.
But it was originally used to describe people who came out of the Roman Catholic Church because they thought it was subverting the gospel. So the German word evangelisch was used to describe what we now call Protestants.
Yes.
Protestant isn't a very good word because it's like they're protesting, but what exactly are they protesting about? It doesn't really give much information. So it's the evangelical is a better word term, but that's come to mean a certain type of Christianity, a certain style and culture of Christianity. And in America, there are churches that are evangelical in style, and in belief. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, a CNN article, which I'm just going to reference, this is the title of it. Really, if you read the title, you get the idea of what we're talking about. An imposter Christianity is threatening American democracy, they say. This is CNN. Now, CNN has its own particular bias on things. Many people were calling it the Clinton News Network during the election when there was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, because they were so ridiculously biased. It was embarrassing. They did not like Donald Trump, so they wouldn't report it fairly. There's been analysis of this. It's not just anecdotal. There's been analysis of the coverage, whether it's positive or negative, and so heavily weighted. From then on, still today. So CNN isn't necessarily the best people to look at, but they are if you want to see, well, what is the Democrat Party, which is sort of like the establishment in America, at least at the moment. What are these people? What are the left-wing people who are a bit anti-Christian, really, just as a whole? What are they saying about it? And they say this. They say that there's been an uprising of white Christian nationalism in America. And this uses Donald Trump as a sort of icon or avatar for them. Not that he agrees with them necessarily, but they see him as the person who should be president. And they see him as a person that God has put in place. And before the disturbance in the Capitol building on January the 6th, when Donald Trump didn't retain the presidency, but rather it went to Joe Biden, and that's all going very well, of course, but that's the Biden presidency all going very, very well, but that's a topic for another day. When this happened, much of the House January the 6th committee's focus so far, a committee that's been televised about looking back on this event, has been on right-wing extremist groups. But there are plenty of other Americans who have adopted the teachings of white Christian nationalists who stormed the Capitol, often without knowing it. Scholars, historians and socialists. They've accidentally, he's saying, it's the extreme right-wing people who actually went in. But they're being supported unknowingly by these Christian nationalists. So what the article is saying is that they've got a skewed view of politics and they've made it part of their religion. So just in closing, here's one thing that CNN says in this article. It says that one of the key things they have is a belief that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. One of the banners spotted at the January 6th insurrection, as he calls it, was a replica of the American flag with the caption, "Jesus is my saviour, Trump is my president."
Right.
Those were both fundamental parts of their belief. It says here, it raises the line separating piety from politics. This is a characteristic of white Christian nationalism. And one of the most popular beliefs among white Christian nationalists is that the US was founded as a Christian nation, that the founding fathers were all Orthodox evangelical Christians, and that God has chosen the US for a special role in history. So I finish there, they do say more, but what do you think of this white nationalism?
When you first mentioned the term, my mind leapt to a particular grouping of Christians, I'll use that term, although I'm not sure that it is absolutely right, who I would know as Theocratics. They believe in a theocracy. And I wonder, could they be termed theocratic?
So yes, that's interesting. So that is the accusation exactly. You've pinpointed it. They're being accused of having a theocracy, being directly ruled by God. So you haven't got the separation of church and state that is thought to be part of the Constitution.
And in actual fact, these theocratics would be veering towards the kind of punishments for wrongdoers as Islam is. That is, that if anybody disobeyed God's law, as laid down in the Bible, particularly in the Ten Commandments, that the same punishments will be carried out.
Yeah, Islam does base a lot of its teachings on that, although, I mean, I just point out that it's rather more cruel, the Islamic treatments. And there isn't, for example, an injunction in the Bible to cut off the hand of a thief. That is Islamic and not Christian. But that isn't the opposite of the claim. I think that is the exact point. But it's the opposite of what they're calling Christian nationalists are saying. And I rather hope there is. But this is my view, Beryl. I think we should have such a movement in this country. And we should be at the forefront of it. I think we need Christian nationalism. Here's what I mean. Talking about nationalism. Nationalism is really our big family. We should be proud of our family. They do things wrong which we apologise for and we want to do better. But we should be proud of them and support them and love. So I think there's nothing wrong with loving your country. Nothing wrong.
No.
I think you should do. In the Bible, people were meant to love their country, love the people of Israel. There was an archetypal nation in the Bible, and they were told to, of course, welcome the foreigner in their midst.
Yes.
And people take that as a reason. So therefore, you shouldn't have borders. You should let anyone in.
Then you can't call yourself a nation.
And they're not foreigners. Both. It's just not true. Let me give an example. I have a church in Seacombe which has nice grass around it, and which you can invite people into. And we had a barbecue there this last Sunday. The reason we can do that is it's got railings around it. Now, I had a church in Edgware in London which had no railings around it. People ran over the grass. So we couldn't invite people in. We couldn't offer them that because if we took the boundary away, there was nothing to offer.
Yes.
So you start to be less generous. You've basically frittered away what you had. So, yes, there should be boundaries. And then you can be generous with what you have. That's at the heart, I think, of what Christian nationalists... And they call it white Christian nationalists. They point out that they scorn the white Christian nationalists, despite the fact that many people in this movement, many supporters of Trump who are Christian, who voice these opinions, are black. Now, if that's pointed out, I've heard this in interview after interview, it's apparent that what they're saying is, yeah, but that's the wrong sort of black, because he doesn't agree with us, or she doesn't agree with us. There is a sort of white Christian culture, I see that. But the movement of white Christian nationalism, I don't think it is white. I don't think it's as white as they think. We see the support for Trump and those sort of politics side of it, and now breaking through in that half of Latinos, which was a big grouping in America that always went Democrat, now by a huge margin, only a tiny proportion would vote Republican. It's now about 50-50. Right. They've seen, particularly through Biden's mishandling of the country, that the Democrats are not on their side, and so they've gone for the other side. Also, in black culture, they still vote Democrat for some reason that I don't see, but to a less and lesser degree. So many more are moving away from them because they more and more see that they've been abused by it. And then many of these black people, many Hispanics, are Christians, more so than the white population, certainly amongst the black population. And they're really evangelical Christians, but not part of that particular style of church. You might think of them as, I suppose, Pentecostal. Many of them are really evangelical in belief. And many of them do support Trump for the same reason. They believe he's doing God well. Now let's get to this fundamental thing. Is it then not true, as CNN claimed, that America was founded as a Christian nation?
I think if you go back to the Mayflower, all the people that travelled on the Mayflower from Europe,
yes,
they were getting away from what they considered was the dictatorship of Holland and England.
Yes.
I think so, because Charles II, or am I wrong, when did they actually travel?
It was King James I.
He was the first Stuart king.
1620.
So they were afraid of what he would bring in.
Yes, but they were all Christians.
Yes.
The point in question is, was it founded as a Christian nation? It was then. But I think that they're referring to later. I think they're actually referring to when you come to the Declaration of Independence and then and the Constitution. The people who wrote that, were they, as it says here, these Christian nationalists who are white evangelicals, they believe that all these founders were Orthodox evangelical Christians. They weren't.
One nation under God is the phrase, isn't it?
This is where I think that the claim is false. This is why I was bringing up this CNN article.
Yes.
note how gradually they lead two things together. Yes, they do believe that the US was and is a Christian nation. They do believe that the Constitution is Christian. And when he talks about God, he's talking about the Christian God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all that is true.
Yes.
But they weren't all Orthodox believing Christians. Benjamin Franklin, the main force behind the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, his ideas of putting in parts of it he actually wrote. He wasn't an Orthodox Christian. He was sort of Christian. You would say he was a deist. He believed in God.
Perhaps you can give what is a deist?
Well, a deist believes in God.
As opposed to a Christian.
Well, a deist often would call themselves Christian, but they believe in God, but they don't believe that God intervenes in the everyday affairs of humanity. So God created everything. That God's laws are good. You can believe in that side of it, but you're not going to have answers to prayer or God speaking to you today.
So they don't believe in his supernaturality.
They don't believe in his supernatural intervention in the world today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Benjamin Franklin, interestingly, knew George Whitefield, the great preacher. They sort of wrote to each other lots of letters, and we know of their beliefs. And George Whitefield, great evangelical preacher, maybe the greatest, had spent his time trying to convert his friend to Orthodox Christianity. It's very well known that they weren't Orthodox Christians, but they were Christian. And this claim that you were meant to have a separation between Christianity and the state is different to having separation between church and state.
Yes, of course.
So there's a Church of England in England which runs everything, and it's really annoying, and we escaped that. We don't want that anymore, they were saying. So as we form a federal United States government with all the different states having representation,
yes,
we're not going to have a federal church.
Right.
That's up to the states to have their own church. And then in the States, I believe this is in every state, they also decided not to have a state church. The churches there, they grew up, but it wasn't a state-sanctioned church, it wasn't part of the state as the Church of England is.
So that's why the Anglican form of church in America is Episcopalian.
Well, there is an Episcopalian church. The Episcopal bit just means bishops. As a certain way of structuring the church, you have bishops overseeing, and then you have priests and deacons. It doesn't quite work that way these days, but theoretically, that's how the Church of England is structured. But other churches don't have that. They have a minister or pastor of a local church, and then they have a church meeting which decides things. And other churches have a process of calling and discernment. So there isn't a top-down approach. There isn't a democratic approach. You simply sense the Lord's calling, which they say is closer to what was meant by both these things in the Bible. But yes, the point about it in America is separating the church and state. There's no actual suggestion, this is my argument here, there's no suggestion that at any point that the civil government was meant to not be Christian. I think because it was assumed that it was Christian.
Yes.
There wasn't another game in town.
I've always thought of the government of the United States has been leaning very heavily on Christianity. Perhaps not Christianity as I know it, but certainly basing itself on the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, people do argue that America is actually a secular nation because of the varying views on Christianity taken, there were even units. But, in fact, that they thought that they were Christian can see by the various battles that continued with Muslims, with the trading links over in Africa. When they were talking about religion in America, they didn't mean Islam.
No.
They meant Christianity. Now, you have an exception in Judaism because of the close links between Christianity and Judaism.
Yes.
So I think that they did include, can be a religious Jew. But Islam wasn't included.
No. And of course, the American motto is, "In God we trust."
Yes.
If anyone were to ask, well, which God are you referring to? They say, well, there's only one.
The problem is this distortion, I believe, from this article, and it's quite widespread, I happen to pick this article, that there's this Christian nationalist movement that is dangerous, much as social nationalism was dangerous, the National Socialist Party, rather. I think it's because they're scared. There's entrenched power interests, and they're scared that they're gaining power.
I think that's usually true anywhere, because wherever you get any exercise of authority, there's always some power behind it.
Yes. There we are. There's a Christian nationalism.